This is the final review project for Anthony Holmes and Rookard. We'll be covering the modules 4, 5, and 6. First, we started module 4 by outlining the time frames that we will be talking about throughout the rest of the module. The time frames that we outlined were the progressive movement, World War One, World Wars One and Two, and the Roaring Twenties. During the progressive movement, it really starts to change, show the change in Americans' thought, from the growing power of corporations to um, women's suffrage, which is them earning the right to vote, labor conditions, wanting transparency in these corporations, and American thought being driven more towards data points more than a crafty politician telling them what he or she thinks they should do. Also, during this time, of course, we had Black Tuesday, which was the Great Depression, which was a very crucial time for Americans and American workforce. Um, and there was a ton of new technology that came out through this time, just based off of need. Corporations are fast becoming the norm to the American society. It is more normal to us. We're used to seeing mega corporations being stretched out across the American states, and really there's some that are stretched across the world itself. But prior to 1880, corporations are a really small thing, and mom and pops, small firms are kind of spread out throughout the nation, doing their little bit of work. But after 1880, we're starting to see corporations actually starting to take over and push out the smaller firms. And they're doing this by having incredibly large budgets, and they're able to, of course, put more money into research and development with creating new products and new innovations, but as well as attracting bright new talent, to come and work for them and help build their brand. Um, the effects on engineering it has is it creates opportunities for engineers to become wealthy, from getting with a corporation and becoming productive and well liked and being able to promote pretty quickly. And of course, with promotion comes more money. So you're able to kind of redefine yourself, um, from a middle class farm child to a business engineer, which is what we tend to see during this time. Is more farmers or farmers' kids are leaving, going to school, and coming back as engineers and not wanting to work in the farm anymore. So continuing on the management promotion opportunities that have been opened up by these larger corporations and them being more product driven, it's created a lot of upward mobility for engineers. You're able to promote pretty quickly through the corporation and become from a behind the desk kind of crunching the number kind of guy to a management or director level supervisor. This is great for engineers. It creates more demand. During this time, we have seen an influx of engineers, or people seeking the engineering degree, increase pretty significantly. We're also seeing that Henry Ford is really trying to make his stamp in the automobile industry stick by making Ford vehicles more affordable for the middle class. Previously, they were kind of expensive to make, they were pretty slow. The turnaround from start to finish, with the automobile was pretty long. So he knew he needed to shorten it up so that he could make them cheaper and therefore become more affordable to more people, which of course creates a higher profit line for him. So he starts developing the assembly line. And the assembly line is a place that I wouldn't want to work today because it was really strict, it was really fast paced, you really had to keep up. And in the video with Charlie Chaplin, we got to see some extreme examples of working on an assembly line. But um, a lot of that was driven by scientific management. Continuing more into scientific management, which was a new process at the time developed by Frederick Winslow Taylor, who was an engineer himself and a tennis champion, which I found amazing. He developed this process by looking at a laborer and studying his moments, his wasted movements, and just his overall efficiency, and trying to improve upon that, which he did. Um, his he would take and try to capitalize on every movement, every step, every second from when the worker came to work to when he left. And his theory behind it was the worker will be okay because we'll pay them more. And it just takes away the whole factor of that worker wanting anything else than a higher wage. His interaction with Smith, um, the tone of the whole interaction just seemed really derogatory and abusive. But this process is widespread at the time because things are starting to become more affordable. Electricity's pretty well spread throughout the country. Radios are starting to come and be more affordable. So the appeal to be able to sell to middle class America is really starting to form. Like I was saying in the previous slide, Ford is also trying to figure out this process with the assembly line. They are both kind of intertwined. The scientific management and the assembly line both use this principle um, of just trying to make the worker more efficient. Um, and it's really productive. It works. You can get more production out of somebody by really harping on which you may feel as wasted time and moments. It takes away the skill from the previous floor managers and supervisors, from people that have worked from that production floor up, and replaces them with scientific managers who are pretty much scientific management specialists. They know the process of getting more efficiency from your labor, which is not so much the job. So yeah, that was the innovation of scientific management. In the Great Depression, Hoover was the president, whom also was an engineer, a very successful engineer, who had worked for mining companies in Australia. He held various offices previously for past administrations and was very successful in those appointments and was generally well liked throughout the Americas. He also was a humanitarian during World War I, with just getting aid to people, and well known as a man to get things done. Which unfortunately is not what he's known for during this time in the Depression. He's a great opposer of heavy government influence in the economy. Thusly, he doesn't act fast enough to try to stimulate the economy to get Americans back on track. Um, and because he's seen as absent and he's not willing to stimulate the economy and with government money, um, the tent cities that have just popped up from people not being able to pay their mortgage and pay their rent and not having jobs to go to even try to earn um, the money to pay the mortgage or pay the rent. They nicknamed those Hoovervilles because he's seen as the president who created those. In Module 5, we started to get into the Cold War, which is the time period right after World War II when the US and Russia really recognized themselves as the world power leaders and saw themselves as enemies from then on. up until relatively recently. Um, During this time, the military really starts to utilize engineers, especially younger engineers. Um, the government or the military really starts to put a hand in universal university research labs to try to direct the products that are coming out of those bright facilities with bright young minds working in them. The Cold War was really started as the U.S. and Russia withdrew from the victory in World War II and returned back to their home countries and realized, hey, there's a bigger dog out there, and I think I want to fight it. There's no physical location that fighting is actually happening. It's really just the threat of. Nuclear weapons are well known now and has been duplicated by Russia, and so both stockpiles of nuclear weapons are growing at this time, and thusly it creates a paranoia in both Russia and America of the threat of them bombing us, so it drives the military budget up, and they spend their money on trying to find, um, within reason, defense options as well as offensive options. They do this in many places. They contract out to some private firms, but they also give money and grants to universities for attempting to, or giving them money to work on new innovation and weaponry and defense projects for the military, which allows them the ability to not have to hire those engineers or scientists, or we just kind of get to come pick our food up, which is a great benefit if you're in the military. Um, but it does create some things that are uncomfortable for the brains that are behind it, because they create this weapon and have no say so on how or when it's used, which um, in most cases can make you kind of uncomfortable depending on what you've created. We also see that the paranoia created by um, the threat of nuclear war also creates some investment into bad um, ideas that just never produce fruit. One in particular being Star Wars, which was heavily backed by Reagan and just became obsolete and never really saw the light of day because of the scale of the project. It was just behind or ahead of technology, and it was going to be huge. It required so much to get going that it eventually was scrapped. But the paranoia created by the Cold War does create some pretty cool things, like ARPANET, which is the basis for the internet that we get to use and enjoy today. That was heavily used for communications for the Manhattan Project as it was moved from location to location. Um, but yeah, the Cold War was a scary time, but at the same time, it was a great time for innovation and creative thinking.
One of the more notable aspects of the Cold War engineering was the space race. In 1961, the Soviets sent the first man into orbit. This was seen as a huge defeat for Americans. John F. Kennedy then pledged to get a man to the moon by 1971. We actually landed in 1969. We all know the famous quote by Neil Armstrong, "One small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind." Control over space was seen as essential to the defense, but rockets could also be used to deliver nuclear warheads. Something else really cool that came out of the Cold War engineering, sort of. society was cross-organizational development. And one of the main ones we really learned about in class was the collaboration between MIT and IBM. IBM was used as a main contractor paid for by the military, and then MIT was able to oversee the manufacturing and supervise IBM in order to create this new technology sort of needed for the war. And this kind of brings in this like cool idea of like not everyone really needs to do everything, and that it's more of like not one organization needs to be held responsible in particular. There are many benefits to the military-industrial complex. We have the internet now as a result, and many other items have crossed over into mainstream, such as Teflon because of military funding and projects. However, this also causes an imbalance in our spending as a country. The military budget is far overblown, and they are very adverse to budget cuts. So other parts of our budget, such as education and social security, are suffering. The military budgeting also causes more encouragement for war. So money continues to be fed into the military and doesn't really lend itself towards peace. Module 6 is also possibly my favorite unit of the session. It concentrates a lot on three main things, which are the politics of algorithms, how minorities are having better inclusion and being an engineer, but not really so much so, and also the effects of information technology and energy waste in our society. Engineering in today's society is still very white and male. There has definitely been a large spike in increase in inclusion since the 1950s, but that progress has also unfortunately been very slow and lately has also become very stagnant. This is often because of a lack of social pressures and the lack of access. Even like when we think to like young kids in like kindergarten through 12th grade in high school, because poorer communities are often filled more with minorities, this also often lends itself to like a lack of interest because those opportunities just aren't available. However, during World War II, men left to fight, which did leave a lot of gaps in factories and other engineering and STEM jobs that women were able to step in and fill. Computers, which were like the people who did calculations originally, were some of the first engineering jobs that women were seen fit to do, and they helped a lot with things like the space race in particular. And we think of women like Catherine Jones, who played a huge role in making the calculations that made space flight possible. And through the 60s and 70s, this helped make a huge push in receiving equal opportunities for employment. There's also been like a huge jump in the amount of engineering degrees obtained by minorities since the 1970s, even though these numbers are still very small. The one area of minorities that's seen the greatest amount of exponential growth has been with Asian Americans, but this is more just with the numbers of degrees that are obtained rather than jobs that are in higher paying, higher status jobs. Like they're more the entry level and less managerial positions. Algorithms affect so much of our modern lives. They have effects on whether or not we receive social services, whether we get into schools, or get loans, etc., etc. Most algorithms are going to make money and benefit the private company more than they are like us as users, even though, it kind of sucks. But this unfortunately leads them to being biased and allow those who are already ahead to stay ahead. Think of the S-merger reading and how the family screening tool was very heavily biased against poor families. Because of algorithms, though, we also have things like the facial recognition systems, which can be, both a good thing and a bad thing. It's good because it makes life, a little easier when it comes to things like tagging photos or like opening your new iPhone X or whatever. But we also need to be aware that, the information that's gathered from these things and other algorithms, they're being sold to the government and to other major corporations for information. We also know that when it comes to algorithms, again, things like the family screening tool or self-driving cars, they're going to have to make hard decisions that affect us as the masses as a whole. And more often than not, like, we're not consulted for those decisions. Like, things we care about aren't really taken into mind with these. And because of algorithms and AI, unfortunately, this also means to a loss of lower class jobs as well. Again, thinking again about the self-driving cars. With self-driving cars, that means a loss of jobs for like taxi drivers, Lyft, Uber, and things such as that.